Captain Marcus Hayes stood tall in his crisp navy blue uniform, the golden stripes on his shoulders glinting under the fluorescent lights of Gate 17. It was a typical morning at the bustling international airport, with travelers wheeling suitcases, children laughing, and announcements echoing through the terminal. For Marcus, this flight was just another day at work, until it wasn't. As he approached the cockpit door, ready to begin the pre-flight checks, something unusual happened. A young crew member, fresh-faced and visibly nervous, stepped forward to block his path. "Excuse me, sir," the young man said hesitantly, clutching a clipboard tightly in his hands. "Can I see your credentials?" Marcus paused, slightly taken aback. He'd been flying for over 20 years, commanding some of the largest aircraft in the skies, but he'd never encountered such hesitation when entering the cockpit. Still, he remained calm. With a polite smile, he pulled out his identification badge, which clearly displayed his name, photo, and rank as captain. "Here you go," he said, holding it up so the crew member could inspect it closely. But instead of stepping aside, the young man frowned, looking even more uncertain. "Are you sure this is yours?" he asked awkwardly, his voice trembling. Marcus blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Was this person questioning whether he was truly who he claimed to be? "Yes, it's mine," Marcus replied firmly but patiently. "I'm Captain Hayes, and I'm here to prepare for the flight." His tone carried authority, yet there was no hint of anger or frustration. After all, misunderstandings could happen, right? But deep down, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if this had anything to do with the color of his skin. As one of the few black captains in the airline, he'd faced subtle biases before, though nothing quite like this. The young crew member shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "I'm sorry, sir, but I need to confirm this further," he mumbled, glancing toward the boarding area where other passengers were starting to line up. Time was ticking away, and delays were unacceptable in aviation. Every second mattered, especially for an international flight scheduled to depart within the hour. Marcus felt a knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't just about being stopped. It was about how unnecessary and dehumanizing the situation felt. Here he was, dressed in full uniform, carrying valid credentials, and still being treated as though he didn't belong. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was about to command a massive jet carrying hundreds of lives across continents, yet someone doubted his ability to even enter the cockpit. Passengers began trickling past them now, their curious eyes darting between Marcus and the crew member. Some slowed down, whispering to each other, while others simply stared. Marcus straightened his posture, refusing to let embarrassment creep in. If anything, he knew he had every right to be there. What he didn't know was why this simple process had turned into such a spectacle. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the crew member muttered something about needing to check with a supervisor and scurried off. Left standing alone by the cockpit door, Marcus exhaled deeply. He glanced around, noticing the mix of confusion and judgment on the faces of those nearby. It was clear that everyone assumed something was wrong, and unfortunately, they weren't entirely wrong. While waiting, Marcus's mind wandered back to his early days in aviation. Becoming a pilot hadn't been easy, especially coming from a community where opportunities like these were rare. He'd worked tirelessly, sacrificing weekends, holidays, and countless hours of sleep to earn his wings. And now, after achieving so much, he found himself stuck in this absurd moment, reduced to proving his identity to someone who should have trusted the evidence in front of them. Just then, a senior pilot walked by, nodding briefly at Marcus before disappearing into the cockpit. That small gesture stung more than Marcus cared to admit. Why hadn't anyone intervened? Why was he left to deal with this alone? Feeling a surge of determination, Marcus reached for his phone. There was one person he knew would understand the gravity of the situation, and who had the power to make things right. With steady fingers, Marcus dialed the number of the regional director, a woman named Linda Carter, whom he'd collaborated with on several projects over the years. When she answered, her cheerful greeting quickly turned serious as Marcus explained what was happening. "Linda, this isn't just about me," he said evenly, keeping his voice low so bystanders wouldn't overhear. This reflects poorly on the entire organization. We can't keep letting moments like these slip through the cracks. On the other end of the line, Linda listened intently, her silence speaking volumes. Finally, she assured Marcus that action would be taken immediately. "Stay strong, Marcus," she said firmly. "You're not going to handle this alone." Hanging up, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Whatever came next, he knew he'd done everything he could to stand up for himself, and for others who might face similar challenges in the future. Little did he realize, though, that this single call would set off a chain reaction far beyond what he'd imagined. The seconds felt like hours as Captain Marcus Hayes stood outside the cockpit, his presence commanding yet undeniably tense. Passengers continued to shuffle past him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and confusion. Some whispered behind cupped hands while others openly stared, trying to piece together why a man in full pilot uniform was being barred from entering the cockpit. The young crew member who had questioned Marcus's credentials returned with a supervisor, a middle-aged man wearing a clipboard like a shield. His face was flushed, and he avoided making direct eye contact with Marcus. "Captain Hayes?" the supervisor asked cautiously, his tone laced with uncertainty. Marcus nodded once, his jaw tightening slightly. He didn't need to say anything. His uniform badge and calm demeanor spoke volumes, but instead of stepping aside or apologizing, the supervisor hesitated, glancing nervously between Marcus and the growing crowd of onlookers. "Let me just confirm this," he muttered, fumbling with his radio to call someone higher up the chain of command. Marcus could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Every second that ticked by made the delay more noticeable, and every pair of eyes watching only deepened the humiliation. He thought about the passengers boarding the plane, many of them trusting him to safely guide them thousands of miles away, and how this spectacle might shake their confidence. What message did it send when even the captain wasn't immune to doubt? As the standoff dragged on, Marcus's phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. It was Linda Carter, the regional director he'd spoken to moments earlier. She had promised swift action, and true to her word, she delivered. Within minutes, 2 senior executives from the airline arrived at the gate, looking flustered and out of place among the travelers. One of them, a tall man with graying hair, approached Marcus immediately, extending a hand. "Captain Hayes, I'm so sorry for this misunderstanding," he said earnestly, though his voice carried an edge of panic. Behind him, the young crew member and the supervisor exchanged uneasy glances. Clearly realizing the gravity of what they'd done, the executive gestured toward the cockpit door. "Please, allow us to escort you inside." Despite the apology, Marcus didn't move right away. He looked directly at the executive, his dark eyes steady and unflinching. "This shouldn't have happened," he said firmly, his voice low but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "I've been flying for over 20 years, and I've never faced anything like this. Not because of a mistake, but because of bias." The executive winced visibly, nodding quickly. "You're absolutely right, Captain. This is unacceptable, and we'll address it fully. But for now, let's get you into the cockpit so we can keep things moving." Reluctantly, Marcus followed them through the door, leaving behind the murmurs of passengers and the embarrassed faces of the ground staff. Inside the cockpit, the familiar hum of instruments and controls greeted him, offering a small sense of relief. Yet as he settled into his seat and began running pre-flight checks, he couldn't shake off the frustration simmering beneath the surface. This wasn't just about him. It was about the larger issue of systemic bias that persisted in industries, like aviation, where diversity was still sorely lacking. Back at the gate, chaos erupted as news of the incident spread. Ground staff scrambled to manage the delayed boarding process, while passengers exchanged opinions ranging from outrage to disbelief. Some defended Marcus, pointing out the absurdity of questioning a pilot's identity based on appearance. Others shrugged it off, dismissing it as a harmless error. Social media played its part too, as photos and videos of the scene began circulating online. Hashtags like the Respect Our Pilots and Toxic Bias in Aviation started trending, drawing attention to Marcus's story. Meanwhile, the airline's corporate office was already buzzing with activity. Linda Carter convened an emergency meeting with key decision-makers, including the CEO, to discuss how to handle the fallout. While some executives argued for a quiet resolution, to avoid bad press, Linda insisted on transparency. "This isn't just about damage control," she said sharply during the meeting. "It's about accountability. If we sweep this under the rug, we're sending a message that these kinds of incidents are acceptable. And they're not." By late afternoon, the airline issued a public statement acknowledging the incident and pledging to investigate thoroughly. They emphasized their commitment to fostering an inclusive workplace and vowed to hold those responsible accountable. However, the initial response drew mixed reactions. Some praised the airline for addressing the issue head-on, while others criticized them for waiting until public pressure mounted before taking action. For Marcus, the rest of the day passed in a blur. He focused on executing a flawless flight, ensuring the safety and comfort of his passengers. But as the plane soared above the clouds, he couldn't help but reflect on the events that had unfolded. This wasn't the first time he'd encountered prejudice, but it was one of the most blatant examples. And while the airline's apology provided some vindication, it didn't erase the sting of being doubted in front of hundreds of people. When the flight finally landed at its destination, Marcus stepped off the plane to applause from the cabin crew and passengers alike. Many had heard snippets of what had happened and wanted to show their support. A few even approached him personally to express admiration for his professionalism and composure. One elderly woman clutching a cane told him, "You handled that with grace, Captain. Don't let anyone dim your light." Her words stayed with Marcus long after the flight ended. Grace, he realized, wasn't just about staying calm in difficult situations. It was about using those moments to spark change. As he packed up his gear and prepared to leave the airport, Marcus knew this wouldn't be the last chapter in his story. Something bigger was brewing, and he intended to be. The days following the incident were a whirlwind for Captain Marcus Hayes. News of what had happened at Gate 17 spread like wildfire, not just within the airline but across the entire aviation community. Social media platforms lit up with discussions about bias in the industry, and Marcus's name became synonymous with resilience and professionalism. Yet despite the outpouring of support from passengers, colleagues, and strangers alike, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was bigger than him. It wasn't just about one man being denied entry to a cockpit. It was about exposing flaws in a system that had long ignored the experiences of underrepresented groups. Back at the airline's headquarters, the investigation into the incident moved quickly. A team of human resources specialists, legal advisors, and senior executives pored over security footage, witness statements, and internal communications to piece together exactly how such a situation could occur. What they uncovered was both troubling and unsurprising. The young crew member who had first questioned Marcus admitted during interviews that he'd made assumptions based on appearance, saying things like, "I didn't think someone who looked like him would be the captain." His words sent shockwaves through the company, highlighting the pervasive nature of implicit bias, even among employees who likely didn't consider themselves prejudiced. The supervisor who had hesitated to resolve the issue fared no better. When questioned, he confessed that he'd been unsure how to handle the situation without causing further disruption. "I froze," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I should have stepped in right away, but I let my own discomfort get in the way." Both men expressed remorse, but their apologies did little to mitigate the damage caused by their actions or the systemic issues they represented. As the investigation unfolded, disciplinary measures were announced swiftly. The young crew member was suspended indefinitely pending mandatory diversity training, while the supervisor faced termination for failing to uphold company standards. These decisions sparked heated debates within the organization. Some employees argued that the punishments were too harsh, claiming the individuals involved were simply products of a flawed system. Others believed the consequences weren't severe enough, insisting that accountability needed to extend beyond individual mistakes to address deeper cultural problems. For Marcus, watching the fallout unfold was bittersweet. On one hand, he appreciated the airline's efforts to take responsibility and make amends. On the other hand, he knew that true change wouldn't come from firing a few people or issuing public apologies. It required a fundamental shift in mindset, one that prioritized inclusivity, education, and empathy at every level of the organization. Linda Carter, the regional director who had supported Marcus from the start, recognized this as well. She reached out to him personally, inviting him to collaborate on developing new initiatives aimed at combating bias and promoting diversity within the airline. "Marcus," she said during their phone call, "you've already inspired so many people with your strength and dignity. Now, we need your help to turn this moment into lasting progress." Marcus agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to channel his frustration into something meaningful. Over the next few weeks, he worked closely with Linda and her team to design comprehensive workshops focused on unconscious bias, cultural competency, and allyship. They also created mentorship programs to support minority pilots and crew members seeking leadership roles. Marcus drew from his own experiences, sharing stories of the challenges he'd faced throughout his career, and emphasizing the importance of creating spaces where everyone felt valued and respected. Word of these efforts began to spread, earning praise from advocacy groups and industry leaders alike. However, not everyone welcomed the changes. Some veteran employees pushed back, arguing that the focus on diversity was unnecessary or even divisive. During one particularly tense meeting, a senior pilot scoffed at the idea of mandatory bias training, muttering, "We don't have time for this nonsense. We're here to fly planes, not hold hands and sing songs." Marcus listened quietly, letting the comment hang in the air before responding calmly. "Flying planes is our job," he said, his tone measured but firm. "But treating each other with respect is part of that job too. If we can't trust one another, if we allow biases to dictate how we interact, then we're putting ourselves and our passengers at risk. This isn't about politics. It's about professionalism." His words resonated with many in the room, silencing critics and opening doors for more constructive conversations. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift, not because of grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but because of small, consistent actions that demonstrated the value of inclusivity. Meanwhile, the airline launched a nationwide campaign to rebuild trust and reinforce its commitment to equality. Billboards featuring Marcus alongside other diverse pilots appeared in major cities, accompanied by slogans like, "Your safety is our priority, no matter who's at the controls." Advertisements highlighted the importance of representation in aviation, encouraging young people from all backgrounds to pursue careers in the field. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with applications from minority candidates skyrocketing in the months that followed. Despite the progress, Marcus remained grounded. He knew that real change took time and effort, and there would undoubtedly be setbacks along the way. But he also knew that moments like these, the ones that forced uncomfortable conversations and demanded accountability, were essential for growth. As he prepared for another flight, Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The incident at Gate 17 had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated, but it had also given him a platform to advocate for something greater than himself. Looking ahead, Marcus envisioned a future where no pilot, regardless of race or background, would ever have to prove their worth simply to do their job. That vision kept him motivated, even on the toughest days. Because for Marcus, this wasn't just about fixing a broken system. It was about building a better one. And he was determined to see it through one flight at a time. The weeks that followed the incident at Gate 17 marked a turning point, not just for Captain Marcus Hayes, but for the entire airline industry. The story of how a decorated pilot was denied entry to his own cockpit had ignited conversations far beyond what anyone could have predicted. While the airline scrambled to address the fallout, Marcus found himself thrust into the spotlight, not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience and change. Behind the scenes, the airline's leadership team worked tirelessly to implement the changes they had promised. New diversity workshops were rolled out across all hubs, mandatory for every employee from ground staff to senior pilots. These sessions weren't just PowerPoint presentations or checkbox exercises. They were immersive experiences designed to challenge preconceived notions and foster empathy. Role-playing scenarios forced participants to confront uncomfortable truths about bias, whether conscious or unconscious, and encourage them to reflect on how their actions impacted others. Marcus played a key role in shaping these programs, often leading discussions and sharing his personal experiences. He spoke candidly about the subtle ways bias had affected him throughout his career, from being overlooked for promotions early on to enduring skeptical glances from passengers who questioned his authority. Bias isn't always loud or obvious, he told one group during a session. Sometimes it's quiet, a glance, a hesitation, a doubt that lingers just beneath the surface. But those small moments add up and they leave scars. His words resonated deeply with many attendees, sparking raw and honest conversations. Some employees admitted to harboring biases they hadn't even realized existed, while others shared stories of times they'd witnessed discrimination but stayed silent. For the first time, people felt safe enough to talk openly about issues that had long been swept under the rug. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, defensiveness, and even tears, but progress was undeniable. At the same time, the airline launched its mentorship program, aimed at supporting minority employees aspiring to leadership roles. Young pilots, flight attendants, and ground crew members were paired with seasoned mentors who provided guidance, encouragement, and advocacy. Marcus took several mentees under his wing, including a young black co-pilot named Jamal Carter, who reminded him of himself when he was starting out. Together, they navigated the challenges of climbing the ranks in an industry still dominated by tradition and conformity. Jamal wasn't the only one benefiting from the initiative. Dozens of employees from diverse backgrounds began stepping forward, eager to advance their careers with newfound confidence. One standout success story was Priya Patel, a South Asian woman working as a junior mechanic who dreamed of becoming a lead engineer. With her mentor's support, she completed additional certifications and earned a promotion within 6 months. Her achievement inspired others, proving that opportunities could be created when barriers were dismantled. Despite these strides, not everyone welcomed the changes. Resistance bubbled beneath the surface, particularly among older employees who viewed the initiatives as unnecessary distractions. During one workshop, a veteran pilot stood up and voiced his frustration. "I've flown for 30 years without needing this kind of training," he grumbled. "Why are we suddenly focusing so much on race and gender? Doesn't competence matter more than anything else?" Marcus listened patiently before responding. "Competence is absolutely critical," he said, his tone calm but firm. "But here's the thing, competence doesn't exist in a vacuum. If someone has to work twice as hard to prove themselves because of their race, gender, or background, then we're failing as an organization. Our job isn't just to fly planes, it's to create an environment where everyone can succeed." His response silenced the room, forcing even the skeptics to reconsider their stance. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift. Employees started recognizing that diversity wasn't a threat to tradition, it was an enhancement. Different perspectives brought innovation, creativity, and stronger teamwork, qualities essential for navigating the complexities of modern aviation. Externally, the airline faced scrutiny from both critics and supporters. Media outlets continued covering the incident, dissecting every move the company made. Some praised the swift action and transparency, hailing the airline as a trailblazer in addressing systemic bias. Others argued that the efforts were too little, too late, pointing out that similar incidents had likely occurred in the past without consequence. Social media remained a battleground, with hashtags like bias in aviation trending alongside debates about accountability and representation. Amidst the noise, Marcus became a public figure, invited to speak at conferences, panel discussions, and community events. He used these platforms to amplify his message, urging other industries to take a hard look at their own practices. "This isn't just an aviation issue," he said during a keynote speech at a national aviation summit. "It's a human issue. Bias exists everywhere, in schools, hospitals, boardrooms, and beyond. The question isn't whether we see it. It's whether we choose to act. His speeches struck a chord, inspiring companies outside the aviation world to adopt similar initiatives. A major tech firm reached out to collaborate, seeking advice on implementing bias training for its workforce. An international hotel chain invited Marcus to consult on improving inclusivity in customer service. Each opportunity reinforced his belief that meaningful change was possible if people were willing to listen and learn. Back home, Marcus balanced his growing advocacy work with his primary responsibility, flying. Every time he stepped into the cockpit, he carried the weight of what had happened, but also the hope of what could come next. Passengers occasionally recognized him, thanking him for standing up against injustice. Children, especially, looked up to him, not just as a pilot but as someone who refused to let adversity define him. One day after landing a red-eye flight, Marcus received a letter slipped under his hotel door. It was from a young boy named Ethan who wrote, "Dear Captain Hayes, I saw you on TV and now I want to be a pilot when I grow up. My mom says I can do anything if I work hard. Thank you for showing me that dreams really are possible." Holding the note, Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. This was why he kept pushing forward, to ensure that no child, regardless of their background, ever doubted their ability to reach for the skies. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with each step, he moved closer to a future where equity and respect weren't aspirations, they were realities. As he tucked the letter into his bag and prepared for another day of flying, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Change was happening, slowly but surely, and he knew that, together, they were building something greater than any single person could achieve alone. Months had passed since the incident at Gate 17, and Captain Marcus Hayes's life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. What began as a humiliating moment of bias had evolved into a catalyst for widespread change, not just within his airline, but across the entire aviation industry. The ripples of that single event continued to spread, touching lives far beyond the confines of an airport terminal. Marcus's advocacy work had grown exponentially, earning him recognition as a leading voice for diversity and inclusion in aviation. He traveled frequently now, speaking at conferences, meeting with policymakers, and collaborating with organizations eager to learn from his experiences. His story resonated deeply with audiences, because it wasn't just about pointing out problems, it was about offering solutions. Whether addressing a room full of executives or mentoring a young aspiring pilot, Marcus always emphasized the importance of action over words. "Talk is cheap," he often said. "Real change happens when we roll up our sleeves and do the hard work." One of his most significant achievements came when the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, announced a new initiative inspired by Marcus's efforts. Dubbed the Skyward Path Program, it aimed to increase representation among pilots, air traffic controllers, and other key roles by providing scholarships, mentorship opportunities, and outreach programs targeting underrepresented communities. Marcus was invited to serve on the advisory board, ensuring that the program prioritized equity and accessibility. For him, this was a dream realized, a tangible step toward breaking down barriers that had long kept talented individuals from pursuing careers in aviation. But Marcus didn't stop there. He also launched his own nonprofit organization, called Wings of Opportunity, dedicated to supporting minority youth interested in STEM fields and aviation. Through partnerships with schools, community centers, and flight academies, the U organization offered workshops, internships, and financial aid to help kids take their first steps toward achieving their dreams. One of its flagship events was an annual Aviation Day, where children got hands-on experience with simulators, met real pilots, and learned about the science behind flying. Seeing their faces light up with wonder reminded Marcus why he'd chosen this path in the first place. The impact of these initiatives became evident as more diverse candidates entered the aviation pipeline. Applications from women, people of color, and individuals from low-income backgrounds surged, signaling a shift in perceptions about who could succeed in the field. Among them was Jamal Carter, Marcus's former mentee, who earned his captain's wings after years of dedication and hard work. When Jamal sent Marcus a photo of himself standing proudly in front of a cockpit, Marcus couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. It was proof that the system could be rebuilt, one success story at a time. Still, Marcus knew the journey was far from over. While progress had been made, challenges remained. Some critics dismissed the push for diversity as mere tokenism, arguing that qualifications should always trump representation. Others claimed that focusing on race and gender detracted from merit-based hiring practices. These arguments frustrated Marcus, not because they were entirely wrong, but because they missed the bigger picture. Diversity and competence aren't mutually exclusive, he explained during a televised interview. In fact, they complement each other. A diverse team brings different perspectives, which leads to better decision-making and innovation. That benefits everyone, including passengers. Despite the occasional pushback, Marcus found strength in the growing network of allies who supported his mission. Pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, and even passengers joined forces to champion inclusivity, creating a grassroots movement that extended beyond corporate policies. Social media played a crucial role in amplifying these voices, with hashtags like non-Fly-with-Pride and non-Open Skies for All gaining traction worldwide. Stories poured in from people sharing how Marcus's example had inspired them to pursue their passions or stand up against injustice. On a personal level, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. Flying remained his greatest joy, but now it carried an added layer of meaning. Every time he stepped into the cockpit, he thought about the countless individuals who might one day follow in his footsteps. People who would look like him, sound like him, or come from similar backgrounds. Knowing that he was helping pave the way for them filled him with gratitude and determination. One evening, as Marcus prepared for yet another flight, he received a message from Linda Carter, the regional director who had stood by him during the initial incident. She shared exciting news. The airline had been awarded a prestigious industry honor for its commitment to diversity and inclusion. "This wouldn't have happened without you, Marcus," she wrote. "You turned a painful moment into something extraordinary. Thank you for showing us what true leadership looks like." Reading her words, Marcus smiled softly. He knew the award wasn't just about him. It belonged to everyone who had fought alongside him, believed in him, and dared to dream of a fairer future. As he boarded the plane and greeted his passengers, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was more than a job. It was a legacy in the making. That night, as the aircraft soared above the clouds, Marcus looked out the window at the endless expanse of stars. He thought about how far he'd come. From the boy who once dreamed of flying to the man who was now reshaping an entire industry. There were still obstacles ahead, of course, but Marcus faced them with unwavering resolve. After all, every great journey began with a single step, and Marcus had taken many. When the plane touched down safely at its destination, Marcus walked off the runway knowing that his work was far from finished. But he also knew that he wasn't alone. Together, with the support of countless others, he was building a world where no one would ever have to prove they belonged, not in the cockpit, not in the boardroom, and not in any corner of society. And that, he realized, was worth every challenge along the way.